One Tuesday a month, I grab a cup of tea and I review an anime. And since there's been a lot of controversy around the new Netflix release of Neon Genesis Evangelion, I decided I'd do that. So in case you're new, I am a professional anime and game translator myself, and I thought that with this month's review, instead of reviewing Evangelion as an anime, I would review the translation of it. A couple of my Italian viewers commented that there's been a lot of controversy about the Italian translation on Netflix, so much so that like they're redoing it, but there's also been a lot of outcry with American, North American, Western, English-speaking fans about the retranslation, the subtitle, and the dub. So I watched through the entire series on Netflix. In fact, I just finished the end of Evangelion like 4 hours ago. I need therapy. And I took some notes, so I'm gonna give you guys a rundown of what I think of the translations as a translator. I always drink tea when I review anime, and because it is summer and also the evening and I don't do caffeine after 3 in the afternoon, this is actually Japanese barley tea, or mugicha. It is like roasted barley. It's hard to describe. It's kind of like a really smooth, light coffee. And I really like it. I'm not a huge coffee fan, but I really like this. And this is my first mugicha that I've had like this year at all, because it does not get very hot in Washington. And like, this is just a really great refreshing drink if the weather's really hot. But it's also good drunk hot. It's just a really good drink. And I have a link below in the description as always if you want to buy some. And let's get to the review. Oh yeah, and spoilers in this video. So I know y'all clicked on this video because you want to know if I think the translations of Eva on Netflix are good or bad. So I'm just gonna cut right to the chase. They're good. Okay, I'll go into that a little bit more. So first off, I noticed no blatant mistranslations, no occurrences of like, Ritsuko said, "There's a pen on the table," and it was translated as, "My cat has fleas." It's like, so no blatant mistranslations of anything. And that's to be expected. I would hope that in a very high-profile translation of a very popular, iconic series on Netflix, one would hope that, you know, the translations would be, you know, accurate. There wouldn't be any blatant mistranslations. I did not notice any blatant mistranslations. They were just incorrect. Also, generally, I found that the translations were localized quite well. If you know me, you know that I'm a big fan of localized translations, not literal translations. I did a whole video about that, actually. But anyway, yeah, his translations, Dan Kanemitsu's translations were pretty well localized. For the most part. Like, I could only find a few minor examples of where he could have localized it better, and I will cover those examples later in the video. But for the most part, like, good localization as well. It seems that most of the complaints that the fans of Evangelion are having, they're just focusing on a few examples, and it's more where Dan Kanemitsu's translations were different from the original ADV subtitles that were made in the 90s of this series. And they're not looking at the bigger picture. They're not like, they're focusing on like the 0.002% of the translations that were, yeah, questionable. And we'll get into those. And they're not looking at the bigger picture of like, but overall, like if you overlook that like 0.002%, good translations, good localizations, well done. Okay, so first I'm gonna go over just a few examples of what were good localization in those translations and what were not so good localization. And what were not so good localization in the translations, just to give you an idea of what I mean when I say what was good and bad localization. So for the good examples of localization, Asuka in episode 8. So when she says, "Oh, so is this the third children that I keep hearing about?" And she says, "Don't tell me it's this sleaze bag." The original Japanese there was "Masaka imano," and then there was like a ... trailing off, so "Masaka imano." And as I mentioned in one of my other videos of common translation mistakes I see in anime, a common translating mistake from like less advanced translators is if a character in Japanese trails off in their sentence, they'll trail off in English as well instead of filling in what that character was actually saying. quite obviously. So masaka ima no ... means like, semi-literally it means like, don't tell me the one now ... Don't tell me it's ... But basically what she's saying is, don't tell me it's this sleazebag, don't tell me it's this idiot, insert insult, because Asuka's kind of a brat. So yeah, that was an example of a good translation, filling it in. Don't tell me it's this sleazebag. It puts Asuka's personality in there much better. It's kind of funny. Good localization. So another example of good localization was episode 19. So this is after Shinji was ordered to basically kill Toji in his Eva, because the Eva was going, you know, berserk and haywire. And they're like, Shinji, kill him, otherwise we're all gonna die. And Shinji refused to kill Toji. Like, he's like, no, I'm not gonna kill him, he's my friend, and killing is wrong too. And in the aftermath, they're all telling Shinji, hey, you should have killed him because, like, we all could have died. So when they told him, hey, you should have killed him, he said, そんなの関係ないって言ってるでしょ? That literally means that sort of thing, not related. That's what I'm saying, don't you know? That's like literally what that means. In less caveman-y, less like broken up, literal-ish translation, it would be, I keep telling you that's not related. Kanke is relationship. Kankenai means no relationship, so not related. Or like, it doesn't matter. But it was localized as, I said that doesn't make it okay, or that doesn't make it okay. And I think that was just a really good localization of that. It still hit the same sentiment. You know, they're saying, hey, they're thinking more utilitarian. It's like, hey, kill him and then you can save the rest of us. And Shinji was like, but that doesn't make it okay. Like, that doesn't make killing him okay. Rather than, that is not related to it. That has nothing to do with it. It's like, yeah, literally that's kind of what he's saying. He's saying, like, it shouldn't even be, we shouldn't even be discussing, like, how killing him would save us, because killing him, it's like, that's wrong. Killing him is wrong. That doesn't make it okay. So, good localization. Another example of a good localization was in the end of Evangelion, I need therapy. When the government dudes find Shinji, they put a gun to his head and they're about to kill him, and then they say, waruku omoanai de. I don't remember what their speech pattern was exactly. It might have been waruku omou na, because that's more masculine. Basically, it means literally, don't think badly of us, or, you know, don't think badly of us is literally what that means. And then Misato barges in just before they're about to kill Shinji, and she puts a gun to the government guy's head, and she repeats the words right back at him. And it's like, don't think badly of me, pow. And that was a really cool moment. Now, I was saying it literally that way at the moment, but it was localized as, hey, nothing personal. Which I think is so much more, like, punchier. And it's just so much cooler when Misato was like, hey, nothing personal. I think that's just so much better than, hey, don't think badly of me. It's like, people don't really talk like that. It just sounds so much cooler. It sounds so much snappier and punchier. Hey, nothing personal. Even though, you know, literally they were saying, hey, don't think badly of me. As like, hey, I'm just doing this, you know, don't think badly of me. Nothing personal. It's pretty much the same sentiment, even though literally different words. So that was a good localization. So now some examples of less good localizations or non-localizations, instances where it could have been localized a little better. Like I said, like, I had to really, like, be extremely picky, and, like, every time I noticed there was a bad localization, I, like, took a note. Like, not every time, but a lot of the times that I noticed, I took a note. So, I mean, if I had noted all of the good localizations, you know, they would have outweighed the bad localizations 1,000 to 1, probably. So, you know, there weren't very many bad localizations, but I'm just going to give you some examples of a few that I happened to notice. So one was, this isn't exactly a bad localization, it's kind of like iffy, it's a judgment call, but it's an issue that two of my Italian fans told me about, and it's the word chuchi. Misato uses chuchi a lot, and it's not really a word, it's kind of a made-up word. It's basically a variant of chotto. I even looked up chochi in Japanese Google just to make sure. It's like, yeah, it's not really a word. But yeah, it's kind of like little. It's like little isn't a word, but little is a word. But if I say little, it's a little bit silly. It's a little, I'll be a little bit late. So that's kind of what chochi is. It's just kind of like, it's kind of a cutesy, silly sort of way of saying a little bit, or kinda, or sorta. Dan Kanemitsu just kind of ignored chochi altogether. There was no like consistent like word that he then used whenever she used chochi in a sentence. Sometimes like whenever she used chochi in a sentence, there wasn't even a little for chotto. Just whatever made more sense in the way that the sentence was being localized. It was just kind of ignored altogether. I don't think that was necessarily bad or good. On the one hand, chochi is like, it is kind of part of Misato's personality, and that she has this duality to her. Like on the one hand, she's pretty silly, darashinai, kind of like crass and lazy, and drinks beer for breakfast and isn't ready for motherhood, and like kind of like that. But then there's the side of her that's the very serious like commander, and like takes no bullshit. So there's this really neat dynamic to Misato's personality, and chochi is just a part of that. It's a part of showing, hey, there's this side of her that's really goofy, silly, kind of immature, you know, and then that contrasts quite well with the side of her that's like this very, you know, serious, strong, capable commander type of character. And chochi was just part of that. I didn't particularly notice that her personality didn't come through in the subtitles. But by having a word for chochi that was consistently used, because it's kind of like a catchphrase. If a character says a word that's not really a word and it's unique to that character, it's kind of like a catchphrase, and it kind of should be treated that way. So yeah, I kind of had mixed feelings on chochi. I don't think it's really a big deal, ultimately. I don't think it's anything worth, like, raising your pitchforks about. Oh my god, how dare they not have her say chochi or whatever. But it's something to consider. And I know in the Italian subs there was this controversy because controversy because the translator basically just made up this word, and they said, oh, it makes her sound really stupid. But it's like, I would argue, but it kind of is supposed to make her sound stupid. Chochi is not like a serious word that a, you know, distinguished woman in her position would be using, and that's kind of the point of her using it, is to show, you know, the two sides of her character. So another example of a localization is, you know, some of those Japanese-isms at home, whenever they'd say itadakimasu before a meal, it would be translated as let's eat. Now, a lot of the times that does work, and it's not awkward, it's not clunky, it's pretty localized. Just have characters say let's eat before they start eating. Because we don't have itadakimasu in English. We just don't have it. It's not like, you know, every time you sneeze, right? In the United States at the very least, it's probably true in other English-speaking countries, but every time, like if I sneezed and if you were sitting next to me, you'd say Gesundheit or God bless you or something. Like, it's in our culture. We say something when you sneeze. In Japan, incidentally, they don't. They don't say anything when you sneeze. And likewise with something like eating. When you sit down to eat, in Japan, you say something before you eat. It's this ritual. You say something before you eat, and that something is itadakimasu. But in the United States, we don't. We don't have this thing that we just say when we're about to sit down to eat. So there's no equivalent to it. So sometimes, you know, it's appropriate to have the character say, let's eat, and then they start eating. But sometimes it's not appropriate. It's like, if the food's already been there, and you're just kind of out of the blue, let's eat, and you're by yourself and you're just eating, it doesn't make any sense at all to say, let's eat. And there were some examples of that in the translations. It's like, that's me being extremely nitpicky. But yeah, there was just a little tiny bit of that in there. Okay, another localization that was a little was in the end of Evangelion. I need therapy. And the reason why I take a little more issue with this localization is because it was a little more integral to the story. It was like a big climactic part between Shinji and Misato and their relationship, and it was very emotional and cathartic. So this is where you really want really good localization, so you can really get that emotional connection with what you're watching. And Shinji told Misato, "Tani no kuseni," and that was translated as, "You're just a stranger." So tanin, it sometimes does mean stranger. It literally means other person. You're an other. You're another person. You're not me. You're another person. But it usually means a stranger, or you're not family. That's usually what tani means. A stranger or not family, or an other. But I think it was a mistranslation to have Shinji say to Misato, "You're just a stranger," because she's not a stranger. It's like you've been living with her for like months or however many long he's been living with her, and they've gotten to know each other pretty well. It's like she's not a stranger. They totally know each other. I think a much better translation of that would have been something like, "You're not my mom. You don't know me." Because that, like, it really hit her. You could tell that it really hit her, like, emotionally when he told her, "Tani no kuseni." Like, you're just a stranger. Like, I don't know, I think "you're just a stranger" is kind of like this misplaced insult, whereas "you're not my mom," I think that would really have hit her harder, because this whole time she kind of was, like, being his mom while not being ready for motherhood, and like stepping up to foster him even though she didn't have to, and like, why am I doing this, and like trying to be a mom to him and just being very maternal and like stepping up a lot of the time and having these motherly feelings for him even though she's kind of also not ready for it, not comfortable with it. I think that would have been, oh, that would have hit so much harder if he'd said, "You're not my mom," instead of "You're not, like, you're a stranger." This is getting to be so long. So now I'm just gonna go over some of the main characters of the series and kind of how their personalities are, and if I felt that generally the translations just matched with their general personalities. Like if I felt that they came across okay, if I felt like maybe something might have been missing, or I'll pose it to you guys, like, based off of my description of their character, do you think that that came across in the subtitles? So Misato. In general, I found that she's a very silly kind of character who's slobby and is like, yeah, whatever, bro, it's all good kind of attitude, drinking beer for breakfast in her civilian life. But as an officer, she takes no bullshit and makes tough decisions with extreme confidence. She doesn't even use that restrained, respectful way women or people in general are supposed to speak in Japan. So as I mentioned earlier, that whole chochi thing with Misato, I do think in a way that it was important to keep chochi, to find some kind of English equivalent for that and use it kind of as a catchphrase for Misato to really show that dynamic of that two sides of her, of, you know, being silly and crass and immature, not ready for motherhood, but then also being very serious. I'd say that in general this did come across just fine in the subtitles, her character, but I'm sure part of that is Mitsushi Kotono because she's just an amazing actress. Then we have Shinji. He's generally meek and underconfident, and I think that definitely comes from never having loving parents and generally never having been loved in his life. He's always like very polite and distant in his speech pattern with Misato and with other people as well. He's just generally, he's a boku. He uses the boku pronoun, which, you know, tends to be like younger boys or, you know, softer boys, very like, you know, not aggressive kinds of boys would use boku. And when he spoke with Misato, it was often translated as Ms. Misato as his form of address, just to put that distance between the two of them, because he was a little like overly polite with her and with everyone else. I think that's also why Asuka like was always so pissed at him as well, but we'll get to Asuka later. So yeah, Shinji, I think he came across pretty well in the subtitles, and again, part of it's probably just because Ogata Megumi is just such an amazing actress. Like, this series has so many amazing actors, it's just like insane. But yeah, like Ogata Megumi and Hayashibara Megumi, which we're gonna get to next, the two Megumis of the 90s that were just amazing, really good. So speaking of the other Megumi, Hayashibara Megumi, who voiced Ayanami Rei. Rei, interesting. She speaks in a very like sort of literary way almost. Everything she says is very poetic and very clearly spoken, and you know, I don't know, there's not very much personality to it. She like almost sounds kind of like a robot. So yeah, Rei generally translated pretty well. I noticed that she called Shinji Ikari-kun, but it was subtitled as Shinji. And I actually questioned that. Usually, I like it when it's subtitled as the character's first name, because it gets confusing, because then you have to learn like 2 names for every single character, and you get confused about who's being referenced. But in the case of Shinji, because his dad is also a character and he's usually referred to as Ikari, and because Rei has such this complex and close relationship with Gendo Ikari, Shinji's dad, I almost feel like it would have made a little more sense to actually have her call him Ikari Jr. or something like that, just because it would just reinforce, like, he's also an Ikari. And then you could look at that sort of, that dynamic of, oh, with this Ikari, with Gendo Ikari, she's like more animated and less like a robot. And then with this Ikari, you know, just watching her evolve, I guess, in the way that her relationship with the younger Ikari is, the Shinji. That's a minor nitpicky thing. I don't know that how that would have changed things so much. But yeah, that's today. And now we're on to Asuka. So I read in one of the articles about fans complaining about how Eva was translated. One of the beefs that fans had was that, like, they were leaving out the German, like they weren't subtitling her German. I actually wrote in my notes before I saw that fans were complaining about that was a good thing, like, good on them for not translating her German, because her German sucked. I couldn't understand it. It was terrible. Like, her accent was ridiculous, horrible, couldn't understand anything she was saying anyway. The Japanese people watching also could not have understood anything she was saying anyway, even if, like, she was using a good German accent. They would not have been able to understand her anyway. So I feel like it's like if the creators of the Japanese show wanted Asuka to be understood when she was speaking German, they would have subtitled her in Japanese. But they didn't. So what that says to me is, like, they wanted us to not understand what Asuka was saying whenever she was speaking in German. Those were supposed to be distancing, alienating moments when you're, like, seeing this other side of Asuka, and you're seeing her being different, but you don't know why, and you don't know what she's saying, and you're like, what's she saying? And I think translating that gets rid of that. So I'm glad that they didn't subtitle her German. So my general impressions of Asuka is, wow, she's a sassy brat, and she's downright mean and arrogant and rude. This is also manifested by the fact that she uses plain speech pattern with pretty much everybody. In Japanese, if you're speaking with people that are older than you or superior to you in some way, you're supposed to use keigo, which is the polite speech pattern, but she does not use that with, like, anybody. She's just very bratty and flat out rude with everybody. And they might have been playing into that stereotype that Japanese people have had. They still kind of have this, but it's been going away. But in the past, they really had this, like, anti-foreigner, this stereotype that all foreigners are so rude. So that might have been where that came from with Asuka. They might have just been amping that way up just because she's a foreigner and German at that. But yeah, I mean, I think Asuka's meanness came across pretty well in the translations. And again, like, her actress was really good. Like, it comes across anyway. But yeah, I think the subtitles were pretty good for her. And now that brings us to Kaoru. So this video is getting a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, so I'm going to split it up into 2 parts. And at this point, I would like to thank my newest patron on Patreon, Roya Ball. This person was extremely generous and also gave a contribution through PayPal, so I wanted to thank this person personally. You can become a patron and join me in my wonderful community if you want to. See you next time!